Cool, great. So we've talked about how we use external modules that currently written by others sharing online. However, not only we have external modules, actually there are also some built-in modules in Node.js and in JavaScript. So how can we use those? How can we import those built-in modules? The first question. And the second one is we'll talk about how do we write our own functions and how do we export and import our own functions or modules. Good. So this is what we are going to talk about. So in C, this is what we did, like hash include library. And in JavaScript, we have seen like import the date function from date function. There are some built-in libraries, not too many. So here are the Node.js built-in modules. We probably will use some of them in this course. For example, the FS for the file system. For example, when we have a file storing all the data, how do we open that file, and how do we read and write in the file? So we'll use FL later in the course. There are also some useful ones, but now we are going to use a simple one for demo purposes, which is the pass. Okay. So we'll import pass from this pass library, and then we can use that. Do we still need to npm install pass? Can we use pass directly after we import it? Yes? Yes? Yes, the answer is yes. Because it's built in. Like when we install Node.js on our laptop, pass, not including pass, so all of these built-in libraries are already available for us to use. So we only need to import it, but we do not need to install them, meaning that we do not need to download it from npm. Yep, quite similar to C right here. Sorry?
What if you download the built-in functions?
I don't think we can download it because it's not. Well, we can try. Like, let's have a look and see if it is on npm, but I've never checked that. Pass. Oh, pass. We do have Node.js pass module. Perhaps we can really download. Okay, so it reminds me of an interesting question. So when we npm install, for example, pass or date function, what if there are multiple modules called the same name on npm? How do they know which one to download? The answer is that they cannot have the same name. You need to name differently, so you can be assured that you are downloading the correct one, as long as you put the name correctly. You do not need to worry that you are downloading something that have the same name but it's different. You do not need to worry about that. Okay, so that is how. Let's run this code so that we can have a try using it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temp.js, and I copy paste this code, and let's run it. Note temp.js. It runs directly. So what pass does is it prints out where you are currently located, like which folder are you currently now, like, and then it will print out the directory, which is this. So we did not install it. We did not npm install pass, and it works perfectly fine. So these are built-in modules, and it is the same with the other built-in modules, so we do not need to npm install them. Okay, so after we're talking about the built-in modules, what about we want to have our, we want to importing our own functions from our own files. So let's start with a function called many-string. I will show you first how it works, and then where is it? Oh, I will also share with you all the codes as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow. Before that, you can have access to all the code on the slide. So you have the slide. The code is different. Code is the same. So I will share with you the same code, but you actually already have access to all the code. They are on the slide. Okay. So here is the function that we define ourselves, which is called many-string. Let's try to run it first to get an idea of what it does, and let's see how we can import it and export it and use this function in other files. Okay, so another useful command in terminal is pwd. It shows you the directory that you are currently in, so that you can double check whether you are at the same directory. So I will try to mention as many terminal commands as I could. Pwd. So yes, we are in the same correct one. So I'm going to run this code. So Node will help us run JavaScript files. Another terminal command. Node we talked last week. So this file is called 2.2 split. Oh, such a long name. So it will print out hello, 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 hello for 5 times. So this is what many-string does. So print out this string for 5 times. Print out the string for the repeat times. Yep, all good. So what if I want to use this many-string function in another file? So the way that I will do is I need to export this function using export default many-strings. The question, what does default mean? I will mention it a bit later. So for now, export default many-string will export this function many-string so that it will be able to use in my other files. Okay. So now I have another file, and not this one. This is the one. Okay, I'll put them together. Yep. So the way we can use this function in another file is through import many-string from this file. And then I can use the many-string function. Any question? All good? So this is how we can use function from my other files. Yep, cool, great. Okay. So the important thing here is the export default and import many-strings from the file. Oops. Did you hear me clearly from the back? I just noticed I did not use my Mac. I'm yelling in the lecture room. Okay. So what if we want to export multiple things? So now we only export many strings here. So what about we want to export more? So now we have another function called add brackets. Here is my code. Where is it? Yep, here's the one. So now I have more than one function. In addition to many strings, I also have add brackets. Have a guess, how can we export and import multiple functions?
Export in an object?
Oh, yes, that's the correct answer. Okay, let me show you how we do that. How can I split my screen? Okay. So the way we do that is we export, instead of export default many string, we put many string under the add brackets in an object, like as an object, and we export this object. Yep. And when we import, we did something similar, like we import both of the two functions, like add brackets and also many strings from this file. And then we can use both of these functions, like add brackets and many strings, here in another file. Yep. Let's have a try. So what I'm going to do is node 2.2 multi export main p2.js, and it prints out hello with brackets for 5 times. You can add more functions here. For example, one more function, and you can add more functions together in this object. And you can export them together and also import them together as well. Yep. All good? Cool. Where's my slide? Yep, we have shown this. Okay, so now let's come back to the question, what exactly is default? So we have seen in the first example, like we export default many strings. So what is it? So when we use export default, we can only export one single thing. Like we cannot export multiple things with the export default. So let's have a try. For example, what about I want to export many strings default. Default many strings, and then I want to export default add brackets. It will be an error message because we can only use export default for one single thing. We cannot export twice. So you can see that error message, syntax error, has already been declared. The default has already been declared. It can only be declared once. However, for the another way of export, like named export, you can export as many functions as you want it to. So it's more flexible. Right? So default export doesn't mean that it's the default way of exporting. It's just the name of the way of exporting. It's called default exporting. Right? So named exporting is more flexible. We can also play with it a little bit. Where's my code? So what about, okay, here is it. With the default import, because we are only exporting one thing, so when importing, we can use different names when importing. Let's see an example. So when we export using the named export, here I had many extreme. It needs to be the same name here. It needs to still be many extremes so that they know which function that you are referencing in the original file that you define the function. You cannot name it something else like many strings and you have something behind, and then it will not be able to identify which function that you are referring to. However, in the default export, you can name it differently. Let me try to find. Yes, here is the one. So here export default many strings, but when you import, you can name it differently. You can import something random, and then when you call it, it will call it the same, like something random, and it will work fine. Because you are only exporting one thing, and when you import, the code will automatically know which one are you are referring to, because you are only exporting one thing and importing one thing. So you can rename it as you want it to. Sometimes this can be helpful. For example, in your main file here, like where you imported the many strings, maybe you already have something that you defined as many string, and then you import many string. It will be very confusing, like which one are you referring to. So in this case, you may want to rename it to something else. Right. However, when you use the named export, we need to keep the name as it is. We cannot change it. Cool. Another thing that we can play with is like we are when in the named export, we are exporting an object. So we can also think like we are still exporting one thing, and this thing is an object, and within this object there are multiple functions. We can also think in that way, right? So we can also have something like export default and many function. So this is something that we can also do. Did I? Yep. Okay, so now when you import, you are only importing one single object. I think I'm making something wrong. Okay. Well, so it's similar to when we see the date function. Did you remember, like when we had the date function, we import, not this one. We had another example. Oh yes, that example. We import this pass. Like the pass is actually we import the pass. You import the pass module, and we wrap everything in a pass object. And when we want to use the functions in the pass object, we use the pass.result function. So this is how we use the function in the pass object. Yep. All good so far? Oh, this is cool. Yeah. We mentioned that in the default export, we can name it differently when we import it. This is something that we can also do with the named import. The way that we can do it is through import. The sum is the original name of the function in the in the file that we imported, and we can use as the name that you want to change it to, so that we can use simple sum instead of sum in this file when we call this function. Right, so we can still change the name, use the name export. It doesn't mean that if we want to change the name, we need to use the export default export. We can still use the name export. Okay, so here's some styling like about styling. So sometimes we want to export or import a lot of things. Like we may have a lot of functions in one file that we want to import or export. Normally we do not put them in one single line because it will be very, very long. Like for example, here, like we have 2 functions to import. Normally we want to avoid very long lines, and we'll separate them in different lines. So this is about styling. We'll talk more about styling in week 3. I think so. Is it week 3? Yes, we'll talk about that in week 3 when we talk about linting. Yes. Great, amazing. Any question from online? Yep. And everything we taught today in the first lecture and this second lecture will be included in Lab 03. So the Lab 02 has nothing to do with what we taught today. So from Lab 03, the labs will be about what we learned in the previous week. So for example, Lab 04 will be about what we learned in week 3, and Lab 05 will be about what we learned in week 4. Make sense? So you have 1 week to digest. Lab 01 is not marked. It's like an exercise, actual exercise like we provided for you. Just an exercise. Make sure that you know how you can check your lab marks and how you can view the solutions. Your Lab 01 solutions have already been released to you. Check that if you haven't. Lab 01 is not marked, but from Lab 02 on, it will be marked. So be sure that you know how to check your marks and your solutions. Okay. There's a question from online. Is there a way to import all functions from a file? Like import, I cannot see, something like in Python. Yes, the answer is yes. Like we can import everything directly together. But different from Python, like Python we can import a file. But in JavaScript we cannot import a file. We need to import functions. And the way we import functions is by we wrap everything in an object and we import that object. So the object has a lot of functions or method, we call it, and we export them together and import them together.
Do you have to specify them one by one? Like,
Sorry.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I was trying to demo, but
We just import them like all in once, like using a star or something like that.
maybe. Yep. Let's have a look at that later, not now maybe. Any hint on satisfactory? Jia asked online. What did you mean satisfactory? Okay, Cout asked a question about, like, I install date and I input 2002-14-03 and it gives me the result as true. Why is that? Why 14 is a valid month? So JavaScript deal with date a little bit weird. Like it kind of roll over the month to another year. So I know it's pretty weird. Like JavaScript sometimes it's a little bit weird. Satisfactory.js is a lab access. So what did you mean? Like, do you have any questions, Eric, from online? Then in which case it will return false for is validate. Okay, so how can we check So we use isValidate to check whether a date is valid. However, we give it something random, it tells us it's valid. So it's not working as what we want it to. So how can we check that? So it's an external module written by people online, but they also kindly provided some documentation that you can read about like how exactly it worked, so that you can debug or make changes to it and make it work as what you want it to. So for this one, you can see that here's a link to documentation. So for some NPM modules, they will provide you with some documentations. And for example, this one, you can search isValid, and you can see how it works. And if you maybe there's, and they also give you some link, maybe report a bug, but yeah. So you can see more details about how it works, and then you can make sure it works as what you want it to. There's another interesting NPM module that written by our wonderful Time. Where is it? So it's a sync request curve. So you may want to use it in your later stage. Is it the one? So this is written by one of our course admins. So you can also write one of yourself. They used to have more information here. Sync request to code. And you are familiar with this one, like for your labs, you see a lot of pictures like that. So this is one like created by time of a course admin. Yep, another example of NPM modules. Okay, all good. Any questions? Nope? Great. So that's all for today. Here's the QR code for feedback. If you have any, you can scan the QR code and let us know. Again, it's anonymous. Yep. Thank you, everyone.